My fellow Americans,
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage you to gather up and hang out with everyone in the chat room. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time is when we do this show live. You can join us for the countdown if you like, or just set your clock and reminder that at 4 p.m. Eastern is when we go live. You can also make sure you subscribe and turn on that bell notification, so hopefully you will get a notification.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
Who are shouting? Just a moment.
I'm not defending him in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planning information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually, the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information, information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plant in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid, and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, a two-part question. What were the objectives or what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding disinformation? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
We become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done, and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have
Yeah, but
standards
here's the
to
problem.
ensure-
We can't
I mean,
even
this is
agree. We can't even
extremely-
agree what disinformation is. You
well-
can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails, definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals
So
are
do you
not
think
impinged, number one.
do you think
And number
COVID
two,
do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
You would know this as a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
Hey everyone, just as a reminder, our show starts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few minutes from now, but I should remind you that we have a daily newsletter. It's totally free. Natalie and I work very hard on it every morning over a cup of coffee, putting the stories together that we think are important that the mainstream media is going to ignore. All you need to do is go to our website. It's just redacted.inc. Put in your email address. We won't ever sell your email to anybody. And then you'll receive a welcome email. And all you need to do is verify that email, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time is when we send out our daily newsletter. And it's about 5 or 10 minutes in length that you can read it over your cup of coffee. And like I said, we cover 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day, plus a couple of things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We try to have some fun with it, add a little humor into it. And again, it's a great way to start off your morning. But it's also a great way for us to stay connected with you as well, because we've been banned and blocked on some of these platforms before, where we haven't been allowed to post anything, not even a community post. So the only way for us to stay connected with you is through our newsletter. We were able to send out a newsletter and say, hey everyone, we're blocked for the next week, and let you know what was actually going on with our show. Anyway, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free newsletter, and it'll be posted first thing in the morning over your cup of coffee.
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
You killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war.
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament,
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be in the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean to the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The majors' assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone. Or to take the nation to war partway, or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip, because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector, you didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me, and he said, sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second. He says, we've made the decision we're going to war with Iraq. I said, we're going to war with Iraq? Why? He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Hey everyone, Clayton here. The show is going to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I should remind you that we have a VIP community. It's our Redacted Rebel VIP community. Now, this show is totally free, what you're watching right now, right? You can subscribe here on YouTube and Rumble, totally free. But if you'd like to support independent journalism, we are run by you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this show. We wouldn't be able to hire the team that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the servers that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the reporters that we have, the team that we have. So you can support us by going to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a VIP community button. Just click that, and for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support us. We put out exclusive content, early interviews that no one else will see, live streams just for our VIP Rebel community. So again, it's totally free to watch this show, but if you do want to support independent journalism, we would really appreciate it. Come on over to redacted.inc, click on that community button, and decide if you want to sign up or not. It's totally up to you. We thank you. And meanwhile, the show will start in just a few moments at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, one of the 4 principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Time, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Time. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbundu women who supposedly had been their victims.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort of totally false propaganda.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Hey everybody, welcome to Redacted on this Tuesday. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natali Morris.
And on this show, we seek the truth wherever it may lead us, and we're not afraid of facts. And we cover the stories the mainstream media largely ignores. The mainstream media has been fawning over this idea that Putin was facing a civil war, Russia's on the verge of collapse. What is the truth in all of that, and where do things stand now that the Wagner troops have been asked to turn over their weapons? Prigozhin has been exiled, and there is talk in Germany of potential peace talks. We're going to unpack all of that in a few moments.
Plus, the United Nations would like to politicize hate speech and also make it so that you can report your neighbor for it. Bolsheviks much?
That's total Bolsheviks.
Right. That's a pretty good one.
Total bullocks.
That's a good one. So we're going to unpack that.
Also, a major move from the United States Senate. They just passed a bill unanimously, Democrats and Republicans, calling on major corporations. I'm looking at you, Raytheon. I'm looking at you, General Dynamics. I'm looking at you, Boeing. You have 6 months to come forward and admit that you've been secretly working on UFO reverse engineering projects, or your funding will be eliminated. This passed in the Senate. Is the deep state and the military-industrial complex happy about this, and are they running the show on this? We're going to dive deep into this brand new Senate bill. Now it goes to the House and could be signed by the President of the United States. Could 2024 be the year of disclosure fully from these companies? We're going to unpack that on the show.
Plus, I'm very excited to bring you the author of Cobalt Red. This is a new bestseller book about cobalt mining in Congo. We all are unwilling participants in this house of horrors that is happening in Congo, and it's time we knew about it and demanded answers from electronics companies, because the device you're watching us on most likely has cobalt from the Congo. If you have an EV, it has cobalt from the Congo. If you have a rechargeable camera, we are all in this together, and it's time for us to stand for real human rights. I don't want to hear anything about diversity involving, any kind of other populist group unless we stand for where there's slavery right now.
And Justin Trudeau, the tyranny of Justin Trudeau continues clamping down on free speech. They just passed a new bill that goes after free speech in Canada. We're going to track all of that and more as Redacted starts right now. Live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you guys so much for being a part of our community here. You know, just a few days ago, we passed 2 million subscribers on YouTube. Thank you so much. And nearing 360,000 on Rumble. Nice to see all of you guys watching us live right now. About 20 or so thousand of you watching us live. So thank you guys so much across Twitter and YouTube and Rumble as well. And if you do subscribe, please turn on that little bell notification so you'll be notified when we go live.
Yes. And also, we notify you of what we're up to on our newsletter. It is a free subscription. All you need to do is go to redacted.inc and put in your email address. Again, all it takes is for you to authenticate the email. There's no upsell on it. It is totally free. It brings you daily geopolitical news along with what we cover on this show, the same topics plus more. And we work really hard on it. We bring it to you Monday through Thursday as a companion piece to this show. And again, something I'm really committed to doing is making sure that if you're a newsletter subscriber, you get original links to the things that we talk about. Usually I don't use someone else's interpretation to lead you in any direction. And very seldom do we put opinions in the newsletter because we want you to sort of read it, come up with how you feel about it, go to original sources, not slanted media sources, and then come here to talk about it after you've digested it, because we don't try to lead you in any one direction here. We want to have authentic conversations, not conversations with misinformation landmines.
That's right. So go to redacted.inc to sign up for the free newsletter right now. A lot of big developments in the war in Ukraine over the past 24 hours. A short time ago, word from Russia that Wagner will be asked to turn over all of its weapons, lay down its arms. Is this the end of the Wagner group? We also hear from Russian authorities they've dropped charges against Prigozhin, the mercenary leader who led this quote-unquote coup over the weekend. And German state media over the past 24 hours claiming peace talks could begin as early as next month, that global leaders met secretly in Copenhagen and they're on board with peace talks. So to make sense of all of this, former UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter joins us now. Scott, thanks for coming back to the show. Let's, I guess, start with Prigozhin and this news of Wagner. Are they done?
Wagner as a private military contractor capable of fielding a conventional military force is finished. It's done. It's over.
And it seemed we saw videos of Russians apparently arm in arm with Wagner forces. There was a lot of apparent celebration. The West was saying, wow, he was greeted with open arms, Prigozhin. I saw a number of CNN headlines saying that it was a hero's welcome for Prigozhin when he went into Rostov-on-Don, and now charges are dropped against Prigozhin. So will he be prosecuted in any way? Is he going to live out his days in Belarus? And what do you make of this Western narrative of sort of a hero's welcome for him?
Well, let's start with the hero's welcome. Rostov is a city of 1 million people. Count the number of civilians you saw in the square welcoming Wagner. First of all, the vast majority of the civilians there were there out of curiosity. When Wagner first approached, there were no cheers. In fact, Wagner's forces were confronted over and over again by Russians saying, "What are you doing here? Why are you making this mess?" Wagner put people on the ground at gunpoint. Wagner, who has no legal authority whatsoever. People need to understand that. This is not a military unit. It's not a paramilitary unit. It's a private military contractor who has no legal authority to operate on Russian soil at all. So these are criminals in a Russian city bearing arms, seeking to take control of the headquarters that is commanding the special military operation at a time when Russia is a life and death existential military struggle against Ukraine and the collective West. The people cheered when Wagner left. They cheered because there was no civil war. They thanked Wagner for making the right decision to get out of town. What those people didn't realize is that Rostov-on-Don was surrounded by 10 to 15,000 Chechen Akhmat special forces who had sent a message to Prigozhin that you're going to die in a matter of hours. That when Putin gives the green light, We will come in and we will kill you, and we will kill all of your Wagner mercenaries. Prigozhin also received the same message from his commanders as they approached Moscow. They entered the Serpukov area, and there were 2,500 Russian special forces lined up there, dug in. They were backed up by thousands more special forces who were outflanking the Wagner forces. And Wagner commanders came back and said, we're going to get into a fight. Now, here's another thing people don't realize. What is a basic combat load? That's what a soldier carries on him to engage in a fight. You know how quickly you fire through your basic combat load in a heavy firefight? Like that. Where's the resupply come? Wagner would have run out of ammunition in hours, and they would have all died. That was the reality. Prigozhin didn't negotiate anything. Prigozhin was told, leave. You're done. Unplugged. Get out of Russia, and Wagner is finished. And that's what we're seeing. So all this concept of a negotiated settlement, Prigozhin making a point, Wagner being treated as heroes. Wagner is a criminal entity. A criminal entity. 3/4 of Wagner refused to participate in this coup d'etat. This coup has been planned for months. Russia has known about it. Russia has been coordinating with the commanders of Wagner to avoid a civil war, to have them conform with Russian law, to have the Wagner fighters sign contracts binding them to the Ministry of Defense, so now that they have a legal status, to get the commanders to do the same thing, to end Prigozhin's billion-dollar money-making venture. People need to understand that Prigozhin is not a military commander. He is a businessman who makes money off of slaughter and blood. Bakhmut, where 20,000 Wagner fighters died. People need to remember that. There is no wonderful formula for Wagner's success. They're not an elite fighting force. 30,000 of the 50,000 Wagner soldiers who fought in Bakhmut were criminals, convicts, with 21 days training. You cannot become an elite fighting force with 21 days training. You were given 21 days training, basic small arms knowledge, basic maneuver, and told, advance or die. That was it. If you survive, your conviction is swiped clean. These were fanatics who fought aggressively, but they're not elite. 20,000 of them died. These units suffered 60% casualties, and Prigozhin's lecturing people saying, we gave you a case study of how you should have advanced through. Prigozhin knows nothing of war. Again, he has no military experience whatsoever. Every operational and tactical decision is made by his commander's council, and this commander's council signed off on tactics that caused shock units to lose 60% casualties, 20,000 dead, and he's saying that the Russians are slaughtering their troops. If the Russian Ministry of Defense followed the Prigozhin model, 300,000 Russians would be dead, and they still would have only advanced a few kilometers. Prigozhin is insane, and that's what people need to understand. Wagner, they fought bravely, they fought heroically, but to call Wagner elite, no elite unit suffers 60% casualties. That's not elite. That's fanatical. And here's the other important thing. The Russian military did not want to fight the Battle of Bakhmut. Prigozhin entered that battle because he was in a very difficult situation. Russian law does not permit a private military army, which is what Wagner had become. It can't operate on Russian soil. So they were going to pause the battlefield, pull Wagner out, and reconcile this legality issue. Prigozhin realized the second they did that, he would lose his billion-dollar business. So he pushed into Bakhmut to keep the fight going, to compel the Russians to fight, sacrificing 20,000 men. Every soldier that died in Bakhmut, it's Prigozhin's fault. He murdered them as a business decision to compel the Ministry of Defense to give him the ammunition to create a precedent of supplying a private military contractor in violation of Russian law. And he continued to push that battle even when the Russian high command said, we don't want this. He forced the Russian high command to divert forces from other areas of the front to protect the flanks of Wagner as they advanced. Thousands of Russians were wounded and killed because of Prigozhin. So this idea that Prigozhin is some sort of military genius who is in command of an elite fighting force that saved Russia, is absurd in the extreme. I'm not denigrating the courage of the individual Wagner fighter or the tactical competency of their commanders. I'm telling you that Yevgeny Prigozhin is a psychopathic, mass murdering criminal, and he's alive today only because Vladimir Putin didn't want to start a civil war where Russians would end up killing Russians.
Fascinating. We had just a short time ago the question of whether or not Prigozhin was working alone in this coup, this march towards Moscow. Rostislav Ayshenko, political scientist, Russian political scientist, says it's not likely that he was working alone. The amount of organization in order to move on this would have required some kind of support from within Russia, perhaps from the capital, from the Kremlin in some capacity. Do you buy that analysis? Do you think he was working with other people, or he was working alone in this decision?
No, I mean, that's an absurdity, frankly speaking. Wagner had become a massive enterprise. Again, by the time they withdrew 25,000 troops, that's a significant force with tanks, artillery, aircraft. They didn't need the Kremlin's help or the military's help to plot a coup. The help that Prigozhin got was from his military command council, but here's the rub. See, Prigozhin's thinking about a coup had been known to everybody. Everybody. The CIA knew about it. We know this now because they admitted briefing the Gang of Eight in Congress about Prigozhin's coup, and they briefed them weeks ago, months ago. MI6 briefed the prime minister about the same thing. MI6 coordinated with the Ukrainian government, telling them to stop your offensive operations until Prigozhin's coup goes forward, because there's a chance there's going to be a civil war in Russia where they will remove forces from the battlefield, and then you can do your attack. Everybody was aware of this, including the Kremlin. But what the Kremlin was doing is they wanted to avoid a civil war. They wanted to avoid a situation where they had to go in and forcibly disarm 25,000 Wagner soldiers. So they reached out to the commanders. Prigozhin could not have done this without the commanders' help within Wagner. That's the reality. And as we found out, 4 out of the 5 members of the command council refused to help Prigozhin. Only one helped him, took his troops. But the rest of Wagner stayed in the barracks, refused to participate. And even the troops that went in, the majority of them were misled. They were told that they were going to secure the border against Ukrainian attacks. Once they arrived, they realized that they had been misled, and half of Wagner wasn't going to participate in any fighting no matter what. Half of the Wagner troops that were there, because they were misled. People confronted Prigozhin while he was in Rostov, Wagner people saying, "What the hell are you doing?" Only the fanatics went forward to Moscow. And what the Russians did there, the Russian government did, is they allowed them through because they didn't want to start a civil war, but they created the final barrier at Serpukhov. They got Akhmat to surround Rostov, and then the phone call was made to Prigozhin, "We're about to kill everybody. Is this what you want?" Prigozhin was hoping, and I believe he was told by Russian oligarchs and Russian exiles who are controlled by British intelligence. We know there was connectivity between Prigozhin and Khodorkovsky, who's a British MI6-controlled oligarch in London. Prigozhin had red flags all over the place. He had failed businesses. The only viable business he had left was Wagner. He makes billions of dollars off of this mercenary bloodlust, sacrificing his soldiers. He makes money off of that. And he didn't want to lose this. And so he was told that if you move, there are people in Moscow who will support you. He would led himself to believe that the military bought into his anti-Shoigu, anti-Gerasimov propaganda, that once he made the move, that the military would rally around him. He was told that politicians would leave Putin, surround him. So he drove towards Moscow, and none of that happened. None of that happened. Everybody rallied around Vladimir Putin. And in the end, Prigozhin was alone. His troops were scared, and they recognized that they were all going to die. And that's why this deal was cut. But Prigozhin had no help from within Russia. He had a lot of help from outside of Russia, which makes him a traitor. So we'll see what his future is. The Russian government doesn't look well on traitors, and I don't think Prigozhin is going to have a long and healthy retirement.
Yeah, Sergei Lavrov saying they are investigating the Western intelligence collusion in this, and so that investigation will go. I want to get you out of here on this question. German state television channel claiming that peace talks could begin as early as next month. They claim that a number of global leaders met last week in Copenhagen, and they are on board with a planned peace talk next week. Do you buy that?
Well, first, I have no doubt that they met. I have no doubt that they talked. I have no doubt that they're looking for peace. But here's the interesting thing. Russia has been saying all along that we, being Russia, want a negotiated settlement to this.
Right.
And Russia has actively been pursuing this. It's been rejected all along by the West. The West has rejected it. Why? Because the West was operating under the assumption that Ukraine was going to win this war, that Ukraine was going to put pressure, that we need to give Ukraine a chance to get a dominating posture militarily so that Russia will make numerous concessions. That isn't going to happen. So now suddenly they're saying we believe in negotiations.
Right.
At a time when Russia's winning and prevailing. You know who wasn't in Copenhagen talking about negotiations? The Russians. The Russians aren't going to play this game.
Right.
Russia has a military objective of the defeat of the Ukrainian army, strategic defeat of the Ukrainian army. That's demilitarization. They have a political objective of denazification and permanent neutrality for Ukraine. And the only negotiation is when Ukraine agrees to all these terms. So until which time the Copenhagen group are willing to say Russia has won the war and Ukraine must concede all of this, they're just talking to themselves. It's literally a self-licking ice cream cone where all these people sit around and enjoy their own company. But Russia wasn't there, and Russia's the only vote that counts at this point in time. The only vote, because they have thrown away any leverage they might have had with Russia a long time ago by insisting on pursuing this war. Now that they've doubled in, they put all their chips in, Russia's mobilized, Russia's ready to win. They want to negotiate away Russia's victory. Russia will never go for this.
Yeah, and of course, Vladimir Putin 2 weeks ago at the Africa Summit, or the St. Petersburg Summit, holding up the peace agreement that was signed by the Ukrainians and thrown in the trash.
And the peace agreement signed by the Ukrainians. But remember, Minsk wasn't signed by the Ukrainians because Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande, the German and French leaders who promised their support, were now saying it was all a sham. We lied to Putin. We misled Putin. So who is Putin supposed to believe? Our Ukrainian government that can sign a deal and walk away from it, always saying that we always lie to Russia, that we only negotiate to get an advantage, to buy time? A European community that wants the strategic defeat of Russia has shown a proclivity in the past to lie about diplomatic arrangements, negotiated settlements, to buy time, to gain strength. And now they're going to come to Putin and say, we want a negotiated settlement. To do what? To buy time, to gain strength at a time when Russia's winning? Putin said about 2014, he regrets not destroying the Ukrainian army at that time when he had them surrounded. He could have destroyed them. He said it was his biggest mistake.
Right.
And he will never make that mistake again. When he says he's never going to make that mistake again, I'd believe him.
And those who have studied him very, very closely say he's one of those people, a politician who learns from his mistakes. So,
imagine that.
Yeah, fool me once, right? So, yeah, we'll see on this. Scott Ritter, thank you so much for your analysis on this. I know it's been a very busy past 72 hours watching this unfold inside of Russia. Thank you so much for your analysis. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Scott. And I just looked over here in the chat. Someone says Scott has been right so far. And remember, Scott, for instance, here's a guy who accurately told us there were no weapons of mass destruction and went before Congress and told us there are no weapons of mass destruction. We see no evidence of this. You can save millions of lives, right?
Yeah.
So he's aware of the lies. He's aware of how these governments lie about the situation. And I think he's absolutely right on this peace agreement. Germany says, yeah, we've been secretly meeting in Copenhagen. Great. Russia wasn't there. They weren't there in Copenhagen. So what does it matter? I mean, you're going to keep holding up these peace agreements that get thrown in the toilet paper, get thrown in the trash.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter to them at this point.
Yeah, that's like That's like David and I getting together and deciding what you guys are having for dinner tomorrow. Like, that doesn't matter. You know, it's like you guys are having chicken.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I guess we didn't vote.
We're actually having pica pow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. Anyway, we've got more news to get to here on this Tuesday. A very busy show because the United Nations is going after hate speech. The United Nations out with their new platform. I didn't see this in the UN Charter. We're going to go through what that means for free speech going forward around the world. And also we're going to look at UFO disclosure because the United States Senate just passed a unanimous bill. This is in the United States Senate that calls for major corporations who've been reverse engineering alien technology. I'm looking at you, Raytheon. I'm looking at you, Boeing. I'm looking at you, General Dynamics. You have 6 months to come forward and admit these programs that you've been working on, these special access programs, off-the-book black programs that you're making billions on. You need to come forward and disclose it, or we're going to cut off all your funding. We're going to discuss that here at length. But first, oh boy, our friends over at Moomoo have an amazing deal just for the month of June. Guys, would you like 17 free stocks? Would you like 15 free stocks plus perhaps a Google or Tesla stock, and on top of that, a free AI stock? That's right. That's what Moomoo is doing right now. That's 17 total free stocks. With Moomoo, my favorite trading platform, there's no steep learning curve. It has a simple interface. It's easy to use, so even beginners can take advantage of the stock market in no time. And right now, they are giving away these free stocks when you open your account and you make your initial deposits. To learn more, check out our link at redacted.inc/Moomoo. That's MOOMOO. They are a massive company, and Moomoo has zero commission trades, and the app looks amazing on every platform, from iOS to Android to Windows and Mac. Moomoo can help you trade with its advanced tools like their stock screener and their earnings calendar. No matter what your skill level is, you'll find fantastic tools that can help you trade. I absolutely love trading with Moomoo. That's where I trade a lot of my commodity stocks. So get access to zero commission trades and 17 free stocks, which includes a free AI stock and either Google or Tesla stock for a total of 17 free stocks when you make your initial deposits. So even if you never do anything else with this account, you just open it, make your initial deposits, you get these free stocks and let them grow. Again, go to redacted.inc/Moomoo, the website, once again, to get these free stocks and open your account today. It's redacted.inc/Moomoo. So people in the chat are asking, what is pica pau? Well, it's a Portuguese dish, right? It's a sliced.
It's made with pork.
Yeah,
it's a
sliced,
pork sauce. It's a pork dish that you stew with some vegetables and then put like pickled vegetables on top. It's kind of sour and it's delicious. My middle daughter loves it.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Yeah,
that sounds kind of good.
You can eat it with rice, or a lot of times in pubs, it's like a early food. It's an appetizer sometimes. But we make it as a dish. I put a link in the chat if you'd like my recipe.
All right.
It's easy.
All right, let's talk about the United Nations. The world is on the verge of nuclear war, and you think that the United Nations would be focused on doing everything in its power to stop that, right? What's bigger than nuclear war, right? All of its hours every day should be taken up with meetings about stopping nuclear war, trying to keep NATO from leading us all into extinction by provoking Russia or doing something else in Taiwan. I mean, what other idiot? Remember, we heard a member of Congress, Seth Moulton, who said, yeah, what if we attacked Taiwan Semiconductor in Taiwan if China moves on Taiwan? Yeah, let's start a global international nuclear holocaust. Let's do that. So that's what the United Nations should be focused on. Instead, the UN is making hate speech its most important focus right now. By all accounts, it is. They're holding multiple panel discussions, releasing reports on this, holding all sorts of social media collections together to put out to make sure that you're fully aware of hate speech. They just announced a new plan to combat hate speech called UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech. That's the name. They've released a United Nations mission statement, which we'll get to in a minute. We'll go through it. But they kicked it off with this tweet. Here's the tweet. This is the United Nations Twitter account. Hate speech can take many different forms, but no matter what it looks like, hate speech has real consequences. Learn how you can take action and say no to hate. And just look at that picture. I mean, look, there's a gun inside of a bullhorn. Like, meaning, yeah, your words kill people. Your words kill people. Words
Hurting
are
your
deadly.
feelings is going to hurt you.
Yeah.
In general. You're not a strong person.
But wait a minute, don't we already have laws on the books, right, that make violence illegal against other human beings? Isn't murder already illegal? Isn't violence against another human being already illegal? And laws inciting violence are illegal? We already have these laws in the books. We all know them. So what the hell is hate speech? So they have a link in there. I'll bite on this. I want to see what you have to say about this. Let's learn how we can take action to combat hate speech according to the United Nations. Let's click the link and see how the UN defines hate speech. So this is the United Nations UN Strategy of Plan of Action on Hate Speech. There's Gutierrez at the top. Hate speech is an alarm bell. The louder it rings, the greater the threat of genocide. It precedes and promotes violence. It precedes and promotes violence. So genocide is what they're going with now. In a response to the alarming trends of growing xenophobia and racism and intolerance, violent misogyny, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim hatred around the world, they're calling on the United Nations in releasing the United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, which you can read fully, the full PDF there. The strategy emphasizes the need to counter hate holistically, while respecting freedom of opinion and expression, and to collaborate with relevant stakeholders. Who are these relevant stakeholders? Because are you and I a relevant stakeholder? Or if I'm a billionaire, do I become a relevant stakeholder? And civil society organizations. Like Black Lives Matter? What other civil society organizations are involved in this? And media outlets. Is Redacted on this list? Because Redacted didn't get a phone call to collaborate on this. Maybe CNN did. What about tech companies? What tech companies are involved in this, and social media platforms are involved in this?
We've seen how tech companies collaborate for free speech. We saw a great example of that over the Twitter files, when you were not allowed to question lockdowns or mandates or even vaccine trials or school closures. Or Hunter Biden's laptop. I have a lot of confidence in social media's ability to counter hate speech.
Well, and if you do, and you talk about what cisgender, right? When Twitter says, you know what, that's now considered a slur. If you say cisgender, that's considered a slur, right? And Australia said, wait a second. We like that slur. We'd like to know what your policy is on that kind of speech. And then to which Twitter responded with a poop emoji, which I love, to the Australian government. Go ahead, David.
Twitter responded with a poop emoji to the newspaper inquiry, not to the Australian government, just to get that right.
Okay. Poop all around. Go ahead, David.
Well, I was going to say, so genocide, murder, assault, battery, those are not subjective terms. That is an actual thing. But hate, when they're saying misinformation, those are subjective terms. Right. It's subjective because what you consider hate, I might not. And so when I talk about this, it's you have to go to the least common, the weakest person among us that cannot take a single ounce of hate. And you have to start there because where does it stop? Who does it have to target? It has to target the weakest among us. Yeah. Otherwise,
and this is something
it's overreaching.
I've been thinking about this a lot since reading that book, Red Cobalt, which we're going to bring you later in the show. And when you think about how there are really kids in the Congo who have to dig cobalt all day because their family can't afford the $5 a month to send them to school because of corrupt governments that you just keep the tax money and don't create educational systems for kids. And so when we want to talk about diversity, we can say, Apple or Samsung or whatever is going to, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to, create these programs around diversity and clamp down on hurtful speech. What they really could do is look at people. You want to talk about diversity? How about we fund schools for these types of kids with the thousands and thousands that we make on profit on every gadget, right? It's sort of ignoring where there are real problems in the world and then creating other problems so we don't see them. And so this idea is that there are people really suffering in the world in really horrible ways, but you're suffering because your feelings get hurt often
on Facebook.
And you cannot tolerate that because, these are microaggressions. And if we can't prevent you from being able to tolerate it, we have a lot of pharmaceuticals to go along with it.
Yeah. Was it Philip? You want to say something?
Well, just think I was going to say, just think how much better though the lives of child cobalt miners in the Congo will be if they don't have to be subjected to hate speech as well.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, it's a win for everybody.
Right. They'll be lifted up out of poverty, right? That's why I started off this piece by talking about the United Nations and the focus. I mean, their focus should be on preventing wars, right? So you mean the people that we've displaced and killed in Syria, like it'll be better now for them, because now we'll make sure that Facebook is safer for them.
You know, those cisgender bomb victims,
right?
You know, they don't like being called that.
So this is all the United Nations trying to define. This is funny, really funny, actually, to watch the United Nations try to define what hate speech is, spinning their wheels in any way that they can, putting out pieces of propaganda. So here they are. They have a video embedded in their hate speech policy plan, and listen to the ominous music and see how they draw comparisons to our history. Watch this.
The risk factors for genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity are higher than they've ever been in our lifetime.
Hate speech, when words kill,
It's
says.
so important that people
Skulls.
see what hate speech can do at its most extreme. Adolf Hitler, for example,
Hitler
created the Ministry of Propaganda and Public Enlightenment to completely change the landscape.
Yeah. So
and if you go through what that ministry was charged to do, was to lift the stereotypes and prejudices that exist in societies and move them into the space where they actually become incitement to violence, so that ordinary people then become enablers.
So it's the Holocaust.
So
hate speech
I think
equals
the message of that
Holocaust.
I think the message of that is to eliminate propaganda, not manage our speech.
Right. It elevated to they literally created a propaganda department.
Yeah.
Right? So
Right.
but okay, you're missing the point here. You're missing the point. So I'll ask the question again then, what is hate speech? Well, the UN tries and I think fails to describe it, although I'll put it up here on the screen. Let's see if you think that they managed to describe it. I think they failed to describe it in just 2 paragraphs. Here they say, what is hate speech? In common language, quote, hate speech refers to offensive discourse targeting a group or an individual based on inherent characteristics such as race, religion, or gender, and that may threaten social peace. To provide a unified framework for the United Nations to address the issue globally, the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech defines hate speech as, quote, any kind of communication in speech, writing, or behavior that attacks or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or a group on the basis of who they are. In other words, based on their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or any other identifying factor. End quote. I don't like your t-shirt. That t-shirt is ugly. That's an identifying factor. However, and then hold on, the last sentence. Hold on. And the last sentence. However, to date, there is no universal definition of hate speech under international human rights law. The concept is still under discussion, especially in relation to freedom of opinion and expression, non-discrimination, and equality. So in just basically 2 paragraphs, you went from trying to define it to basically admitting we have no definition of it.
Oh, it's a dragnet. And then also we need to leave room for freedom of speech. So we're not there yet. So that's helpful.
So we really don't know what it is.
And I was going to say, like, it says, I'm always saying, like, kids these days are too focused on what they are. Like, they're saying that that's who people are, but it's not. That is what they are. Who they are is completely different. And I think that's the thing, is like so many people are focused on what they are now that we're not seeing who they are.
Someone in the chat says, wait a second, gender is inherent? Monique in London says, wait a second, gender is inherent? I don't know. Maybe from that what is hate speech definition.
I mean, they obviously are leaving out biological race here, and gender as an expression rather than an actual identity. Yeah, there's a lot of problems with that. And also the idea that it's offensive to one group, is something they get to define.
So we really don't know what it is the bottom line, but it seems likely that if it's a political organization doesn't like what you have to say, then they will call that hate speech. You see where this is going, right? So I read through the UN's charter this afternoon from beginning to end, wanted to see if there's anywhere in there, by the way, it's their constitution, albeit, right? And there's no mention of combating hate speech anywhere in the United Nations Charter. In fact, you'll find the opposite. In fact, you'll find all kinds of language about making sure people around the world have access to freedom of expression and freedom to practice the religion they want, and free and unopposed access to news and information. The free flow of information, not inhibited by any governments. In other words, no censorship. It's antithetical to the UN's charter. You can read the UN's charter yourself. But the UN's plan of action asks for all of us to see something and then say something. In other words, how can we make sure that we squash speech we don't like by creating what the UN Secretary General Guterres says is counter narratives? He wants us to create counter narratives. You should be creating counter narratives, and so should tech companies be creating and fostering counter narratives. And
There's
one way
the
to build
inoculation again.
Yeah, exactly. And one way to build these counter narratives is through cooperation with tech companies. That's a fancy way of saying suppression of speech for things that we don't like. It turns out the United Nations actually admits that this new crackdown on hate speech was born out of a 2019 working group, which was headed up by none other than Melinda Gates and Jack Ha. Here's their Declaration of Digital Interdependence. This was the group that came together to put this panel, this idea, this report together. They've been hard at work on this since 2019, apparently, figuring out ways that big tech companies could work together to basically suppress speech that they don't like. How can we have that collaboration?
Well, one of the things that they're promoting with this, gun and a megaphone tweet is reporting each other. Is specifically ways to report that, right? And so if you don't like that, they need to know what they can police based on what people say.
Well, and this is the collaboration. This is why you've seen a rise of these like hates. Notify us if you see hate speech on Facebook. Notify us if you see hate speech on Twitter. Notify us if you see hate speech on YouTube. So they've collaborated to come up with mechanisms to report this stuff. Exactly. Go ahead, David.
Right, and you're encouraging people to report on each other, and they're going to do it because everybody's like, oh, we gotta fight this hate speech. It's going to kill people. Like they lead you to believe through propaganda that you're going to physically hurt somebody by doing that. But they're not talking about the punishment yet. You don't even know what kind of punishment you're going to be putting people into at this point, because they're not going to mention that. And who knows what that could be? Is that with this new credit score stuff or this social credit score stuff? Is that just like removing you from society? Like, what is the plan there? Where does it go?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think it goes along with what their agenda is. Like, they can use whatever that you report for their agenda. Just today, I was reading the book by the UN Special Rapporteur who investigated Julian Assange case and continues to do so. And he was really troubled by the Swedish government's allegation of sexual assault by Julian Assange. And the two women that reported him, they sort of had collaborated because they knew each other through different groups, and he had been like intimate with the both of them within a short span of time. And then they both figured out that he had been with the both of them, and they were like, well, we really would like to have him make him take HIV tests. And he really didn't want to. So they threatened to go to the authorities. When they did that, they went to the authorities and said, we don't want to report this as a crime. We don't want to report it as sexual assault. We do, though, want the police to sort of force him to take an HIV test. And then what the government did, because the U.S. had already been putting so much pressure on Sweden, was file a criminal report. And the timestamp on that is before they even spoke to those victims. And then those women were like, wait, what? You're arresting him? You're putting out? No, we just came here to force him to take an HIV test. Like, that's really what this was. And they're like, nope, this is a crime. We got him. And so it's about what the powers that be want to do with it. And those women never got their HIV tests. That was what they wanted. They didn't want it. I mean, it was it is a disservice to all parties involved, but obviously they had an agenda, so they can police what they want and turn what they have into what they want. And that is terrifying.
And yeah, I mean, and this working group, the Melinda Gates group, has been hard at work trying to figure out ways to have big tech companies collaborate, work together, suppress speech that they don't like. They submitted their report last week, and now we have a path forward to suppress the speech that we don't like, ratting on your neighbors, etc. They even made a little promotional video for it from this working group. And I think the first soundbite sums it up perfectly, the conundrum that they're really wrestling with here. Listen.
I see a really important fork in the road for the world. Do we as a world population want to have a set of norms, a set of civilized principles that allow humanity to tap into the potential of the digital revolution? Or do we want to just let things happen as they are? And for me, the high-level panel is an opportunity to set out a roadmap for how we can build that cooperation in this era that so desperately needs it.
Ah, there it is. Did you guys catch that? So
yeah, you know what? Nothing screams cooperation to me like being forced to cooperate. That's how you do it. Is at the end of a gun. That's how you get people to get along. I mean,
exactly.
It's a ridiculous idea.
So I love that's how they start off this piece. Well, it seems you've gotten your wish. You know, remember a few months ago when a woman from the United Nations was on stage admitting how they work with Google to suppress search results they don't like? This is the United Nations admitting this is how they're collaborating right now to suppress. Watch.
You know, we partnered with Google, for example. If you Google climate change, you will, at the top of your search, you will get all kinds of UN resources. We started this partnership when we were shocked to see that when we Googled climate change, we were getting incredibly distorted information right at the top. So we're becoming much more proactive. You know, we own the science, and we think that the world, you know, should know it, and the platforms themselves also do. But again, it's a huge challenge that I think all sectors of society need to be very active in.
Yeah, and you guys are really active in that, United Nations. So thank you for being proactive, letting wars continue around the world. And when, hey, people come to you and say, hey, will you guys please investigate the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline? Can you guys investigate that? And the United Nations says, no, we're too busy investigating hate speech
or
right now.
Child slavery.
Yeah, child trafficking
in Africa.
The biggest business, one of the biggest businesses in the world, human trafficking. Can you guys, the United Nations, handle that? No, we got a hate speech to deal with Melinda Gates. So you can't define hate speech, but we want you to work to help us report it. And
so
then,
I have an idea about this.
Okay.
Since they're workshopping this, right? And they're saying, we want to know how we're going to combat this. We want to know what exactly are the things that we need to police. We should all game it and like put up things that are totally non-serious that hurt our feelings. And then we'll say, well, that really hurts my feelings. I really think you need to look into this. Like, for instance, something that hurts my feelings is when I make the same dinner over and over again and Clayton tells me it doesn't taste as good as the last time I made it. That is hate speech. And I'm going to tell about husbands who talk about lack of consistency in their wives' cooking is hateful and it hurts my feelings and I can't get over it. And there needs to be some kind of, like, that kind of thing. Like, if we all just put something totally, I mean.
Are you sure you don't Reddit?
Are there threads about this?
That is the Reddit approach to everything. Like if there's a bill that passes they don't like, they'll go onto the website where you can fill out a form, and then they'll just fill out as many fictitious forms. And they'll get tens of thousands of people in on it. That's a very Reddit sort of
and then,
thing to do. So
how can they not take my feelings seriously? Along with people who say like, you don't let me in the right bathroom or whatever. Like, why are my feelings?
Can I have are you allowed to have a rebuttal in this hate speech war? But I don't think the United Nations will allow it. Like, will they call up me and say, hey, husband, can you explain your position on this? And I'll say, yeah, it's simple. On Tuesday, she made this freaking delicious meal. It was amazing because she tried something new and she's like, I want to try this. And we loved it. And then she's like, hey, I'm making the same thing again next week. And then changes up all the ingredients and it doesn't taste the same. And I ask, what did you do differently this time? Is that hate speech? So the United Nations would right to jail. Oh, right to jail, I guess. Just curious. You nailed it.
I don't like it.
What changed next week?
I don't know.
Get it.
And so maybe that's one way to just sort of keep them busy while they're trying to take our liberties.
Yeah, because the United Nations doesn't have anything else to worry about. My final question on this is, how will it be enforced? Who's going to do the policing of this? Will you have your bank account closed like they did in Canada? Will you be debanked like they did in Canada? Will you be denied government services for your, quote, hate speech? And these are all serious questions that I think now that we're moving towards a central bank digital currency, this is very applicable, and this is something that's very likely to happen. So the United Nations, the United States looking very closely at this.
And I just want to really quick bring up, like, let's talk about Daily Wire, something like that. You could deplatform a whole organization with this stuff and kind of like push the speech to be what you want it to be. You platform those that you want, you deplatform those that you don't. And then you have an echo chamber that you can't get out of.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that is.
Or think about somebody goes to get a mortgage, apply for a mortgage, and they say, well, I don't like your views on Twitter. And I think that, you are at risk for being canceled or deplatformed or fired from your job because you like certain tweets from J.K. Rowling or what have you, right? Or you participate in things that are considered hate speech. Then you're removed from those pieces of society too. Stranger things have happened because we saw people who were only anti-vaccine mandate get their bank accounts taken from them. So these have real world consequences, as well as just today on social media, a video went viral of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. saying that anytime you hear misinformation or speech policy, you're being manipulated. And he received a standing ovation for that because this is something that, we need to cling to desperately. And it's amazing that in the year 2023, we have to.
Will23 in the chat says wank means it's a new political party called Wives Against Negativity in the Kitchen. Are you a wanker? Are you a wanker? Yeah, I don't have anything to complain about. No, I'm a happy-go-lucky person. I'm the happiest go-lucky person, and I love my wife. And hate speech doesn't come out of my mouth. All right, we got more news to get to here.
What about against passive-aggressive speech?
Yeah, I'm the king of passive-aggressive speech.
Can the UN take on that? Because
they'd have their hands full with me, as Mr. Passive-Aggressive. Okay, we've got more news to get to here on this Tuesday. We're going to talk about this UFO disclosure bill, the United States Senate passing that bill in just moments. We're going to look at what it means for these big corporations that have to now come forward and admit what they've been working on, these black budget projects, these special access projects that they've been hiding, and billions of dollars goes to fund these things. If you don't think they're real, you're smoking crack, by the way. They are real, and they're absolutely part of the government. They're off the books. Donald Rumsfeld himself admitted, hey, there's $2.3 trillion in the Pentagon budget that we spend. We don't know where that money went. We don't know where it goes. Yeah, where does it go? We're going to get answers on that. And we're also going to look at Justin Trudeau and his tyranny in Canada. But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at Lear Capital, because right now we're seeing all kinds of craziness in the housing market. Today, we could see that, housing specifically hit rock bottom, according to Moody's. So we're literally in a doldrums right now. The U.S. dollar is at $32 trillion in debt right now, the U.S. government. The U.S. dollar is being devalued every day. So please be smart about where you have some of your savings right now. If it's in a U.S. dollar savings account, it's losing value every single day. Every single day. My friend Robert Kiyosaki loves to say, if you have, $1 in a savings account, tomorrow that dollar is worth less. That's the way it goes with inflation and the U.S. dollar. One thing that Natali and I love to do is to invest in gold and silver. And in fact, I've got my little gold coins here from Lear Capital and my gold and my silver bar. Silver, man, cheap right now. Grab some silver. Get some fine silver. You can store it, if you've got a little safe or you've got a little vault you'd like to store it in, or you can store it at a remote facility, and Lear can help you with all of that. So just book a call with them right now for free. Get on the phone with them. Call their 800 number, 1-800-613-3557, or go to their website, learredacted.com, to get your free gold and silver investor guide. Receive up to $15,000 in free bonus metals with a qualified purchase. Protect yourself. Even if you've just put a few $100s in there, just to protect yourself, and make sure you've got some money in precious metals. Look, precious metals have sustained themselves for 5,000 years. Every government currency in world history has collapsed. So I like the track record of gold and silver versus government currencies. We have enough history. You know, we have enough history and track record here. Okay, anyway, call their 800 number, 1-800-613-3557, or go to LearRedacted.com. Some huge developments out of the United States Senate, where U.S. senators appear to be moving forward on getting answers about UFOs and UAPs with a major new bill and huge developments. We wanted to bring in Dr. Michael Salla, one of the world's foremost experts on these government secret programs and UFOs. He writes at exopolitics.org. Doctor, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Thank you, Clayton.
So this bill is pretty big developments with this provision of the 2024 Intelligence Authorization Act. What did the Senate bill, this new bill from Marco Rubio and Kirsten Gillibrand, what does it say? What does it demand?
Well, it sets out the parameters by which corporations and individuals working in special access programs are going to be allowed to get funding for their participation in those programs, as long as they report what concerns UAPs, UFOs, anything involving non-Earth technologies, that they are obliged to report that now to the AARO office, that's the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, and in particular to Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. So now all SAPs that are dealing with any kind of recovered technologies, any kind of exotic craft that have been recovered, that these are now obliged to be reported to the AARO office. And if people don't do it, if corporations don't participate in this disclosure, then they're liable to lose their funding.
This is a massive development. I wonder how much teeth it actually has, though. So you've reported your great book on Antarctica, which I just finished reading. Of course, you talk about the deep connections with AT&T and Raytheon down in Antarctica involved in these special access programs. Do you expect that we're going to hear from Raytheon coming forward and saying, yep, well, we have these crashed UFOs. We've been reverse engineering them for years. We hope that you'll keep funding us. Like, are they going to be able to skirt around this?
No, I don't think so. I think this bill has real teeth to it, and it really marks a tremendous transition for the U.S. Congress, which has been pretty silent on these UFO issues for decades. I mean, back in 2001, 2002, I was hearing stories about congressmen being threatened if they dared to pursue anything related to UFOs and extraterrestrial life. And so congressmen were interested. There were quite a number of them. And they were threatened, and they went silent on this issue. But now we're seeing the reverse, which is quite a significant shift, because the Achilles heel of this world of covert special access programs is Congress and inspector generals for the different departments. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are in terms of the hierarchy. You can be a 4-star general, you can be the president himself. And if you go to one of these projects and say, I want to know what's going on in there, you're denied access. We have examples of that occurring. But now with this new legislation, these corporations are obliged to report to this new committee, or this new office set up under Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who in turn has to give regular reports to Congress on what he's finding. So, this is quite a tremendous turnaround, because now for the first time, these projects, special access programs or controlled access programs, they are now on notice that there's a certain timetable that they have to pursue if they want to stay on the right side of Congress and get whatever funding they require for their participation in these kinds of projects.
So they'll have to come forward and disclose UFOs, particularly UAPs, their involvement in the reverse engineering programs of these craft. But also, will they have to expose how much money they've received from U.S. taxpayers off the books? Because, just go back to Donald Rumsfeld in early 2000s saying, then Secretary of Defense, admitting there's about $2.3 trillion that we don't know where it goes. We have no idea where this money goes. And he's part of the Pentagon. Where's this money flowing? Well, they have to come forward and say, yes, we've been receiving hundreds of billions of dollars off the books for the past 20 years in these programs. And by the way, Congress, you're not on a need-to-know basis. So you weren't even made aware of any of this.
Right. Well, there's actually two ways in which these covert programs are funded. One is through what is regarded as kind of like the official black budget, which is these line items in the Department of Defense budget, which refer to kind of like these vacuous, non-existent programs, but the funding for that goes to the intelligence community. And so when you add these all together, in any particular year, you see that the intelligence community gets roughly somewhere between $70 to $80 billion a year. So that's about as much as the intelligence community acknowledges over how much it is funded, which is, there are 18 different intelligence agencies and departments within the US bureaucracy. But there's also an illegal black budget, which is money that is raised off the books, through things like pump and dump economics on Wall Street, through the drug trade, through kind of any kind of illicit shakedown of organized crime. That there are different ways in which government agencies such as the CIA can raise the money off the books to fund these unacknowledged special access programs. So estimates of that go as high as $1 trillion, which dwarfs the $80 billion that Congress believes that the intelligence community is getting. If this illegal black budget exists, which I believe it does, we're talking over $1 trillion, which is even more than the Pentagon. So all of that money is siphoned off through the Pentagon, and we know that through auditing reports that there's a massive amount of money moving through the Pentagon that can't be tracked accurately through any auditing process. But we know that that funding ends up in the hands of these program managers for special access programs dealing with the study and the reverse engineering of these captured extraterrestrial technologies. And so by Congress now authorizing this Intelligence Authorization Act for 2024, what they're doing is they're putting on notice all of these special access programs saying, well, you need to report what you're doing to Dr. Kirkpatrick and the Arrow office. Otherwise, whatever funding you're getting, we're going to block it.
Now, we know that these many members of Congress, of course, are deep in the pockets of the military-industrial complex, right? So this was always my fear when you had a Marco Rubio and his involvement in this and how much money you're getting from the military-industrial complex, and then you're putting forth a bill like this, and how the sort of separation between these members of Congress and then also having teeth in this thing to hold them accountable. And I want to know where that line is. And it seems to me a kind of a blurry, fuzzy line between these people in Washington who get all of their money, a lot of their money from the military-industrial complex. Do you think that they will hold strong on this? I mean, I know you said it does have teeth, the bill has teeth, but who's going to be the enforcer of this? And I know you're not a politician. I know you're not a bureaucrat, but who's going to be the one actually knocking on the door, doing the Elliot Ness, saying, we're coming for you. We're shaking you down here. You guys have been hiding this money and hiding these programs, and you're going to lose your funding here. Who's going to do that? Who's going to be the enforcer?
I think it'll be US Space Command. I mean, of all of the government bureaucracies and departments that stands to benefit the most by this kind of bill and this attempt to create transparency and oversight in UAP programs, the entity which stands to gain the most is US Space Command. Because what they are doing is that they are integrating all of the space assets of all of the military services and developing competent combat capabilities deep space to deal with whatever threat the United States and the Earth faces in the future. And I think that who ultimately is behind this bill, I think absolutely the military-industrial complex is giving the green light to this because Space Command is going to need battle groups, space battle groups. They're going to need space carriers. They're going to need fleets of space fighters. They're going to need to have the capability to develop off-world bases. So this is going to be a huge boon to the military-industrial complex. So you're absolutely right that Congress is in the hands of, or in the pockets of, the military-industrial complex. So and this particular bill had unanimous support. All senators from Democrats and Republicans voted in support of this bill. So it shows that the military-industrial complex wants it to be passed. And as I said, the greatest beneficiary is going to be US Space Command. The greatest loser in all of this is going to be the CIA and the National Reconnaissance Office, because they collaborate in a secret space program, which is done off the books using the funding that the CIA has been able to gain through these illicit activities. But now with this legislation, all of the companies that are involved in developing and reverse engineering any kind of advanced technology, found off-world or whatever, that they have to now create transparency and report this to this Arrow office. So that applies to both the CIA-run programs and the Defense Department run programs. So yes, I think the big beneficiary is going to be US Space Command, and the biggest loser is going to be the CIA covert operations.
I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because now they don't have to operate in the dark anymore, hiding these programs. The amount of money they go through with secrecy, they'll be able to build this out in the open and openly talk about it. And the CIA, of course, which has been running a lot of these secret special access programs involved in human trafficking, all sorts of nefarious things, will get the short end of this stick. Can you be specific about what a special access program? Can you give an example of one that you've researched heavily? What a special access program might shock our viewers to even know exists?
Well, for example, there's a special access. There are different types of special access programs. Some are called unacknowledged special access programs, which is the existence of these programs are not even acknowledged. So you can have select members of Congress, typically the members of the chairs and the minority ranking members of the Senate or of the House of Representatives, the Department of Defense, or the Defense Committee or the Intelligence Committee, that they might know a little bit about these special access programs. But if they're unacknowledged, they can't be revealed. So, for example, you would have, say, at the Area 51 facility, an unacknowledged special access program dealing with the reverse engineering of the propulsion system for an exotic craft. So this is what Bob Lazar reported back in 1989. But there's a cover program for that, for those kinds of unacknowledged special access programs, which is the U-2 spy plane or the SR-71 out of Area 51. So what you have with these unacknowledged special programs, you have the study and reverse engineering efforts with some recovered exotic or off-world technology. But above that, you have a less classified program, which is still going to be top secret, like the SR-71. It will be a top secret program. So that way, anyone in Congress that wants to explore rumors of some kind of like reverse engineering at Area 51 of these kind of technologies, they get read into the SR-71 program, and they know a little bit about that, but they're told that they can't reveal anything about that because behind that there's an even more highly classified unacknowledged special access program.
Yeah, and there's so many of these that you've been documenting over the years from whistleblowers and insiders. Your work is stunning on this. Do you think that, well, now this heads to the House, do you think then President Biden will sign this bill? This is a bombshell piece of legislation.
Well, that's right, yes. I mean, there's going to be a House version that's going to be developed, and what will happen is that even if the House version doesn't have these provisions in there to start with, once it goes to a committee involving both House and Senate Intelligence Committee members to reconcile their two different versions, and that'll be towards the end of the year. They'll come up with a version which is almost certain. Well, it's certain to include this because this was passed unanimously, so there's no objection. And I think, as we said, it's because the military-industrial complex stands to benefit greatly from the passage of this bill. And so once you have both houses of Congress passing this bill, then it'll go to the office of President Biden, and he'll sign it, and it'll become law. And in 2024, at the very least, we're going to see some pretty major disclosures as whistleblowers and corporations really kind of deal with the ramifications of this legislation. Because, I mean, if any corporation is facing the genuine threat of losing funding for its participation in a special access program, then I think it'll say, okay, yeah, we're going to reveal what we're doing to this Arrow office.
Right. And because they're behind it anyway, they want to live it out in public, and they're able to do it in public now without having to spend all the money to hide it. Fascinating. Well, 2024 could be the year of disclosure from a lot of these major companies, and we will be watching it very closely. Dr. Michael Salla is his name. I encourage you to check out all of his writings over at exopolitics.org, and of course, all of his books as well. They're just a mountain of information. Doctor, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Clayton, for having me.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Great to see you. And just glancing here at the chat, I see so many people saying, I can't believe people are not more interested in this, and other people saying it's a distraction or beyond the distraction. Just stop using that term, please, please, please. If the word distraction comes out of your mouth anymore, that's ridiculous. Stop saying that. But I would say anyone who's
start considering that hate speech.
Yeah, I mean, come on, we've grown.
Don't hate on our programs.
I think we've actually grown well beyond that now. That's so 1994. But no, if you're like, oh, this is BS, I can't believe it, I can't, then just do what we do, which is just read a lot of books about it. And I just would encourage anybody who's sitting there right now watching is like, I don't believe this. This sounds like BS. It sounds made up. It sounds like a distraction. Then just do me a favor. I mean, we're all adults here. Start doing some research on it. Just promise me. Read Dr. Greer's book. Start reading a few books on it from people government insiders, people who are in the military who worked on these. People who on their deathbed were dying and admitted to their son that they worked on these programs. Just start reading the research. Read 1 or 2 books on it. And then come back, and I would love to hear from you. In fact, I'd love to hear in our community. We have a private community here for Redacted. Say, yeah, I still found it to be BS. Or you know what? No, now there's something there. There's definitely something there. Once you start reading the amount of books on it that I have and interviewing the people that I have on this, these insiders, these whistleblowers, it may change your mind.
Or you could at least say, I lack the curiosity about that, and that would be an honest answer. One of the things that the media continues to do is talk about, vaccine mandates or anti-COVID vaxxers or whatever it may be, and say, they're wrong, that's misinformation, done, right? Or they just seem to lack any curiosity. Like, is there something there I need to be looking into? Do I know everything, or can I shut that down completely? Or if you just feel like, hey, today I'm studying Cobalt in the Congo, and I'm studying, Justin Trudeau, and I'm studying this, and I don't have any bandwidth for any alien stuff. That's an honest answer too,
Yeah, or maybe, hey, I don't want to hear about Cobalt, but I would really love to hear more about what the government is hiding as it relates to.
They do want to hear about Cobalt. This is my pet project.
Yes, well, all right, don't rain on my parade.
Okay, so I'm not.
That's my challenge. That's just my challenge. We're all adults here. We're all educated human beings, right? You're watching this show. You're listening to great guests. Please just read a book on it, and let's have a discussion about it. Let's be civil. This is what we used to do 50 years ago in the United States, right? You discuss topics, have a discussion about it, and not yell crazy things at other people and tell them that they're stupid. So let's do that. Let's elevate the conversation. Let's elevate the conversation. That's my goal on this show. All right. We've got more news to get to here on the show. We're going to talk about Justin Trudeau going after free speech, blocking this. This is part 2 of his 3-pronged approach for tyranny in Canada. And we're also going to talk about Cobalt and how it's an absolute disaster in the Congo.
Yes, we're going to talk about child trafficking, child mining, sexual assault, and children not going to school and working in extremely toxic environments, and what we need to know about it because we all have it in our house.
That's right. But first, do you want to tell us about our community?
Sure. But first, we're going to tell you about our Redacted community, because this is a way that you can join our community by going to redacted.inc. And for the price of about a cup of coffee, you can join our community and get access to extra conversations, extra live live shows, and also content that we don't otherwise offer for free. Now, we know we give you a lot for free. This show is free. The newsletter is free. This is extra if you'd like to support our community, because we've done many times programs that show you that many advertisers these days just don't want to touch content like this, because we're not willing to toe the government line. We're not willing to not ask critical questions. They don't want that. So if you'd like to support us separately, you can support our show sponsors and also become a Redacted community member. We would love to have you. So you can find out everything about that at redacted.inc.
Well, tracking Justin Trudeau's tyranny is a full-time job. Luckily, we have a man who makes it his full-time job to track Trudeau's tyranny. David Creighton from Human Events writes over at Post Millennial from time to time. And journalist joins us now. David, good to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Very nice to be back, Clayton.
So we wanted to have you on because on Thursday night, the Trudeau government passed their latest bill. And it's, of course, a bill that we've been watching. We've been watching a series of bills over the past year in Canada, going to censor the Canadian people. And basically taking away free speech in that country. That passed Thursday night. Can you walk us through what the bill was or is, and what this will mean for free speech in Canada?
Well, what's going on right now is a threefold attack on basic freedom of speech in Canada. What happened last Thursday was the passage of Bill C-18, which is aimed at big tech, as the Liberals like to say, but it's really about the Internet Extortion Act is what I call it. It's going to force social media to pay Canadian news outlets to run Canadian stories on social media. Now, Meta has already come out and said, no way, we're going to stop running Canadian stories. So it's technically called the Online News Bill. Now the Online News Act. And all of these bills have innocuous sounding names, but what they are all about is just stripping Canada of free speech. And prior to C-18 passing, the Online Streaming Act, which was Bill C-11, passed, and that demanded that all independent news providers or news providers in general have Canadian content regulations. So that's going to hit a lot of YouTubers out there who are not going to have enough Canadian content to stay on the air. And this goes back to an obsession with the Liberal Party that goes back decades, with this obsession with Canadian content at the detriment of free speech. And for a while, this obsession died down because there simply was so much information available on the internet, on cable news, that it was no longer necessary to dictate that there had to be so much Canadian content, because there was a proliferation of Canadian content. But there's something sinister about this. Why are they insisting that the internet now reflect the Liberal Party's view of Canadian content? Why are they insisting that social media pay for Canadian news? I mean, I've been working in online news now for the past 7 years. My salary always went up when Facebook and Twitter and other social media ran my stories. So this is reverse psychology. Canadian media are going to start losing money if social media withdraws from Canada. Not to mention the fact that we're going to become increasingly isolated,
right,
and increasingly in danger of not knowing what's happening outside of our borders, because we're not going to have access to social media. And Meta has already said it's on the way to withdrawing from Canada.
I just don't understand why they would think that Facebook and Twitter would pay the CBC for their news content, or I guess, or even independent creators for their news content. They don't have to do that. I mean, you're getting to use their platform ostensibly for free. Why would they care? And you're right. I think this is going to lead to an isolation. Although, of course, it seems like these lawmakers are saying, no, this is going to help Canadian media. This is going to help Canadian media. What's their rationale for that?
Well, it's strictly the argument that they're going to get a few dollars from social media. This appealed initially to a lot of the legacy media in Canada, what's left of it. And it's astounding if you look at what is actually left of the legacy media. 99% of the daily newspapers in this country are owned by Post Media. And Post Media said, what a great idea, because Post Media is going downhill fast. It's going bankrupt. And they thought, what a nice way to pick up a few dollars. It's not going to be enough dollars to stay in business. They have got to refocus and repackage what they're doing. New media is the future. And of course, new media, I hesitate to say they're all small c conservative, but I say they're small c common sense outlets, right, where they actually have a plan to exist in the modern world. Legacy media is still very much living in the 1970s and 80s, before the internet essentially took over media as we know it. And they refuse to adapt, they refuse to evolve, they refuse to become a part of how media works today. And so they think they can break even by extorting some money from social media.
I mean, what stands out to me is no one's going to be left, because none of these companies are going to pay. They're not going to pay Facebook. Facebook and Twitter are not going to pay for this content. And so what's going to happen is you're not going to have a Canadian voice on any of these platforms anymore, except the official, I guess, press releases that come out of the Trudeau government. I mean, what else is going to be represented on social media from a media perspective? And it'll just be the voices of the regime, basically, shared across social media. They've already clamped down.
That is the stark and very dark truth of this. That's what it's all about. We are becoming like China in terms of having only Liberal Party approved media, thank you very much, is what Canadians can watch and listen to. And it's extremely dangerous. But I tell you, the worst is yet to come. And the third part of Trudeau's what he calls his online agenda, and that's exactly what it is. It's an online agenda, but it's also an attack on free speech. And that's the Online Safety Act. Now that sounds just wonderful. What could be worse than safety?
Right.
But that, of course, is what's coming next. And that is going to be Trudeau's attack on hate speech and misinformation/disinformation. That's the next part of this. That's the scariest part. He is going to make that essentially illegal or subject to massive fines. And this is happening right now in Australia. As I speak, they are grappling with the same legislation. They're about 6 months ahead of us. And they are introducing their version of the Online Safety Act right now. And it's frightening, because the question is, who defines what hate speech is? And who defines what disinformation is? Well, I'll tell you, it's going to be the Trudeau government, or it's going to be the Liberal government who makes that call. And anything that they disagree with is going to be hate speech. You heard how Trudeau talked about the Freedom Convoy. Racist, misogynist, hate speakers.
Right.
They would be banned. Trudeau wants to ban anything he disagrees with, any news or information that he deems bad for his Liberal government. And I think this is absolutely frightening. And I've looked through the coming legislation, because for the last year, the Liberal government has been doing study groups in terms of how this legislation is going to be introduced and what it's going to entail. They've already tried to introduce it 3-4 years ago, but it was just before the summer recess of the Parliament, so it's been reintroduced in the current session. It will come up for debate and vote in the next fall session. And what it really amounts to, though, is that Canada will be a country without free speech, because hate speech can mean just about anything. You can consider Karl Marx to be the author of hate speech because he hated capitalists. But where do you begin and where do you end with a stupid concept like this? It is completely opposed to 500 years of British, Canadian, American jurisprudence and freedom of speech. This is what we fought for, is the right to speak our minds and not to have the government tell us to shut up because we disagree with that, and we're going to call that hate speech. And disinformation is even a larger problem, because anything can be described as disinformation. And we saw this last weekend with all of the crap that was coming out about this Ukrainian coup d'etat, or the Russian coup d'etat. The Ukrainians were on board with this. The U.S. press was largely pretending that this was some kind of huge development. Canada was there, Britain was there.
Right.
And that was all, of course, a lot of misinformation. Right. But not according to this government. That's the truth. And
right, who's policing those guys? When you have it on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, you have the front page of the Atlantic newspaper, this is a civil war. Well, that's all. That was false. That's disinformation. But hey, who's going to police these people? And I just want to ask, I mean, I kind of think about, as a YouTuber myself, as a video content creator, what does this mean for independent journalists, independent creators? Because we already know that there's a war against independent content creators, but particularly among the Trudeau government, we heard their contempt, or his contempt, for independent media. You're not an actual news organization. He wags his fingers at certain news organizations, independent news organizations. So publishing content, what will they have to do? What will they have to think about? Or will they not be able to publish really anymore in the way that they used to?
Well, new media was diametrically opposed to this legislation, C-18, which is the law of the land right now. It's being implemented. They were opposed to this because they know they drive up their readership on social media. I mean, it's just so bloody obvious. I don't know how anybody cannot see this. Anyone who's worked in media today knows that that's the lifeblood of media today, is getting your story out on social media so millions of people can see it.
Right.
And that's not going to happen. So, and they haven't got the money to litigate with social media to find some kind of happy medium, some kind of deal, which is what the Liberals are saying they should do. So they're saying, no, we don't want to hire a bunch of lawyers to find some deal with social media that's not even going to help us in the end. Everybody is going to get hurt by this. And it's going to be even worse with the online safety, because how is it going to affect people who watch Redacted every day? How is it going to affect people who watch my channel, Creighton's Right, I do stuff critical of the Liberal government every day? Is that going to be deemed disinformation because it's contrary to the Liberal policies? Of course it will. I can't see any way around it. And interestingly enough, the people who are framing this coming online safety bill admit, and I have found the testimony, and I've written about this in Human Events and elsewhere, they admit they cannot define disinformation, and that they don't want to define disinformation because that will curtail their ability to enforce this law at random, because that's what it's all about. They just want to put new media out of business because it tends to be more conservative than the legacy media, and they want to stop people from voicing their opinion. It is that simple. It is an attack on free speech that is as sinister as anything out of Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia or China today. And it's absolutely frightening what's happening.
And you know that this is exactly what the World Economic Forum wants. You know that the Biden administration and others are probably sitting back watching this very closely. How do they pull this off? How can we also do it in the United States to the best of our ability and clamp down? I mean, they've already done it. A lot of these mainstream media platforms are already censoring and blocking and taking channels down left and right. We've had friends lose their channels recently for telling the truth. And it's really, really sad. Really, really sad. And that's happening in the United States. already. So, David Creighton, thank you so much for this. We appreciate you keeping an eye on the tyranny that is the Trudeau regime up there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure joining you today.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Trudeau, and thank you in the chat. People saying thank you for covering Canada. We try to cover, we usually can do like 4 or 5 stories here in the show. So we try to cover the tyranny that's happening around the world. We're going to be talking about the Congo next. So we try to cover as much as we can here with the limited staff that we have here. And if you'd like to support independent journalism and what we do here, we are supported by you. We have a store. If you go to redactedstore.com, you can get a mug or a t-shirt or a hoodie or something like that to support independent journalism and what we do. Organizations like us and our friends up at Rebel News, they need our support, because without it, no journalists would be able to do what we do. I mean, we just can't operate like the billionaires that fund, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and all of those people. So we can't do it. So we need your support. If you come to redactedstore.com and you can buy a hat, you can buy a water bottle, you can buy something that will help support the show. And plus they look great. Philip, I think you bought a hoodie and then your daughter stole it from you because she said it was too comfortable. Did you get it back from her?
Yeah, and then I did get it back. I love that hoodie. It's perfect. Like it was like a perfect spring hoodie because it's a light material, and I loved it. But then my daughter loved it too, and then she stole it for a good month. And finally, I was like, nope, I'm taking it back. So it's mine again.
Smart move. So redactedstore.com is the place to go to get your redacted merch. Redactedstore.com.
Well, my guest today is Siddharth Kara. He's the author of a new book called Cobalt Red, How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives. It is a bestseller, but I warn you, it is not a feel-good book. He has gone to great lengths to expose how many of us are dependent on cobalt, the mining of cobalt, which runs every rechargeable device that probably you have in your home, and how many human lives are destroyed by this from Congo. So thank you so much for joining me. I've really been looking forward to talking to you.
It's my pleasure to join you for the conversation. Thank you.
So can you summarize your findings about all of the slave labor that goes on in the Congo and how so much of it is kept from us, and just maybe give us a snapshot of how devastating it is for these human lives?
Well, the summary is this. Right now, there's an enormous invasion of the human rights of the people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as massive environmental destruction and toxic contamination relating to the mining of cobalt. Now, the reason this is important, as you mentioned in your remarks, cobalt is used in the manufacture of almost every lithium-ion rechargeable battery used in the world today. So every smartphone, tablet, laptop, and crucially, almost every electric vehicle, and about 3/4 of the world's supply of cobalt is mined in the Congo in utterly destructive, hazardous, miserable conditions that almost feel like we're back in colonial times.
And so some of the things that you point out are not just exploitation of women, because these are cultures where women are regularly assaulted, not just exploitation of children, but also slave labor, where these children are basically forced into working for these, what do you call them? The guy you call Zeus in the book.
Negotiation.
Okay.
And there's soldiers, there's traders, there's militia, there's Republican Guard. There's a whole array of people who are using violence to coerce the local population, including children, to get cobalt out of the ground. And the reason for this is there's just this feverish scramble. There's so much demand at the top of the chain by tech companies and electric vehicle manufacturers. And as we said, almost all the cobalt comes from the Congo. So there's this enormous fever, this rush, this scramble to get cobalt out of the ground as quickly as possible through whatever means possible. Everyone up the chain, from the companies at the top all the way down to a crazy soldier on the ground, they're all preying on this population of people who are so poor and vulnerable, and who we can't live without, because you and I can't function for 24 hours without cobalt.
Yeah.
So we rely on all this violence and misery and suffering in order to conduct our daily lives.
Right. So it's incumbent on us to not be willfully ignorant about it. When I mentioned to my husband that I was reading this book, he says, "Oh, no, I've read the Apple press releases." He's a fanboy. And he's like, no, they say they only use sustainable and humanitarian practices. But you point out how they can say this with plausible deniability because of these depots, these middlemen where they buy from the depots and then they don't have to see the rest of it. Can you explain that?
Yeah, there's a bit of a shell game that's happening that allows companies at the top of the chain to say, well, I'm buying from ABC Mining Company, and ABC Mining Company tells me that there's no child labor in their supply chain, and they're using sustainable practices. And the reality is, when you actually get on the ground in the Congo, you see none of that is true. It's all marketing, it's all puffery and PR. ABC Mining Company, all the mining companies, there are children digging inside those mines. They're there as plain as day for anyone to see, including the CEOs of these companies, if they bothered to go down to the Congo to see where their cobalt is coming from. Those companies have clear-cut millions of trees, polluted the water, filled the dirt with toxic contaminants. But at the top of the chain, the story is everything's done sustainably. Don't worry, look the other way, carry on upgrading your phone every year, carry on with your gadgets and cars. So there's this disconnect between the stories told by the marketing teams in corporate America, in the global north, and the reality that the people in the Congo reveal. And that's what the purpose of Cobalt Red is to bring those voices and that ground truth out into a world that has no idea what's happening.
One of the things that was haunting is that there's no real architect or engineering there to say, we're going to engineer some tunnels and then we can go down and safely mine cobalt. So they just willy-nilly dig them, and then regularly people die in tunnel collapses.
That's the scramble. You see, there's no other way for people there to survive. You might say, well, can't they grow some onions or find some small business? The big mining companies have swallowed up the entire countryside. They get leased these enormous swaths of countryside to extract copper and cobalt, nickel, that are used in the batteries. Now, when I say large swath of countryside, the largest mining concession in that part of the Congo, meaning the territory they're allowed to rip apart for copper and cobalt, is the size of London. Oh. And there's 15, 20, 25 of these concessions. So there used to be hundreds of thousands of people who lived in that territory. They were forcibly displaced by foreign mining companies, and now they have no other way to survive except to try to scramble back onto that ground where they used to live and dig cobalt out of the ground with their bare hands to earn $1 or $2 a day. Now, you mentioned the most hazardous thing, which is the tunnel digging, because as you go a little deeper, meaning 50, 100 feet down, the grade of cobalt, meaning like the purity of it, increases. So they might earn a little more money. Instead of $1 or $2, maybe $3 or $4. So this is the only way they have to survive. There's this pressure to earn more, so they have enough food to eat. They dig these tunnels. There's no rock bolts, no ventilation shafts. Cobalt is toxic to breathe. There's no supports. And every week, these tunnels collapse. Now, Apple, Tesla, Google, Microsoft, Samsung, all these companies don't talk about that. They don't talk about that truth, but the ground is telling us what's happening, and that is children and young people being buried alive to feed cobalt up the chain.
The stories of the widows who know that their families are underground where they live, it's a lot. It's a lot. And it's important for us to know about them. Now, recently, Elon Musk said something like, oh, we're going to audit these. We're going to put cameras up. I noticed you spar a little with him on Twitter saying this is not really a solution. Can you explain that?
Well, this gets back to that kind of corporate nonsense and PR and puffery that's put out at the top of the chain to sort of misdirect people or make consumers think and shareholders think that these CEOs are doing what needs to be done. And so Elon at the last Tesla shareholder meeting said, okay, I'm going to put a webcam in front of the mine. And if anyone sees a child going in there, you let me know and we'll audit it and we'll deal with it.
Oh, for
what do we
sakes.
say?
Right.
These mines are as big as cities.
Yeah.
Are we putting 25,000 webcams to cover the entire thing? And what happens if they walk in at night? What happens if they walk in the other side where there's not a web? I mean, it's just such nonsense. It's so silly. What needs to happen is Elon, Tim Cook, all the rest of them need to get on the ground understand the reality, accept accountability for the people digging their cobalt out of the ground, and then start talking about solutions rather than sitting 10,000 miles away, minting money and putting out these ridiculous statements that, oh, we'll put a webcam in front of a mine that's the size of New York City, and
Right.
that'll cover it. And we'll see
Yeah.
the kids who are walking.
Or there was a non-government organization out of Washington that said, oh, we're going to do audits. We're going to do that regularly. And then when you asked when were the audits done, they're like, we never did. No, that didn't happen.
There's this whole smoke screen.
Right.
Because understandably, how are you and I supposed to know the truth of what's happening on the ground in the Congo? We would accept the statements of tech companies and NGOs who say they're doing certain things. Why wouldn't we? But the reality is it's all just a charade.
One of the questions I have is whether or not any other country is mining cobalt in a humane way, because it is not only mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but it is maybe the most robust area for cobalt mining.
Well, last year, almost 3/4 of the world's supply of cobalt came out of the Congo. So when you talk about cobalt, it's just Congo. So if you look at a chart of, market share of cobalt production, it's Congo at roughly 3/4 of the world's supply. And then there's a bunch of countries that are 2%, 3%, 2%, 3%, like Australia, Russia, Canada, Morocco. I haven't been to Russia or Australia or Canada to look at their cobalt mining operations. I'm sure they're perfectly fine. I'm sure it's done sustainably. I'm sure people have hard hats and PPE to protect them, and they're paid a decent wage and so on. But that doesn't solve the problem of where the world's supply of cobalt is coming from, which is in the Congo, where none of that's true. And then it makes us ask a question: well, how come the people in the West get uniforms and PPE and decent wages and safety equipment, but the people in Africa don't? What's the explanation other than, well, it's the people in Africa and they don't count as much?
Yeah, so there could absolutely be solutions. We're just willfully not doing it. Now, you're critical of China's role in Congo, even though you point out there seems to be some infrastructure improvement done by China's investment there. But it's almost this major cultural divide that doesn't seem to want to fix itself organically. The Chinese workers are benefiting from cobalt mines and tax favorable programs. The government is not using that tax dollar to invest in their country. So overall, I'm interested. Can you summarize where you are on Chinese investment in Congo and maybe in Africa in general? Because this seems to be a major thing that the world is watching, whether or not it's good for Africa to accept Chinese investment.
Well, the current dominant imperial force in Africa is China. I mean, some people call Africa China's second continent because they have gone from country to country and offered aid and infrastructure and loans and development assistance in exchange for access to raw materials and resources like cobalt, like copper, like lithium, and so on. And in Congo, they've invested billions and billions of dollars to build roads and assist in infrastructure development, to provide loans to the government in exchange for access to copper and cobalt mines in particular. And they struck these deals at the dawn of the battery revolution more than 13 or 14 years ago. So they saw where the future was going. The future was rechargeable batteries, and they locked down the supply chain. So they run 15 of the 19 major copper cobalt mining concessions in the Congo. That accounts for about 70 to 80% of cobalt production coming out of the Congo. It all flows to China for refining. They provide about 80% of the world's refined cobalt supply and probably build more than half of the rechargeable batteries in the world. So they have that supply chain locked down. They pay little concern to the human rights of the people in Africa, of the Congolese people, when they have road projects or other things that they're committed to. They don't even hire locally. They actually ship over Chinese people, get them to do the work for penny wages, and then send them back. So these development projects don't even provide employment for the local population. So it's a very one-sided relationship. The only real beneficiaries in the Congo are the political elite who pocket these big deals and bribes in order to sign deals that give China access to all these resources.
And one of the major reasons that children continue to work in this industry is because their parents can't afford the fees for school, which is not free there, which is about $5 per child per month, right? And so if tech companies really wanted to do something and fund schools and things like that, I mean, if we're really talking about diversity programs, like this is a great place to get started. So you don't give us, though, as the reader, much to do. There's not much we can do. We can't get to the Congo. You could barely get in. All of the paperwork that was required for you to see things and not even bring your phone. You really put the solution into geopolitics. So is that a fair assessment? There's no we need to boycott cars or anything. There's nothing really we can do other than educate ourselves. Is that fair to say?
No, there's more we can do. I mean, you're right. It's not up to you and I and consumers to get on the ground in the Congo and fix the problem. I mean, the truth is, we've been made unwitting participants in an enormous horror. When you bought your smartphone and I bought mine, when someone buys an electric vehicle, they don't tell themselves, 10 Congolese children are going to die so I can plug in my battery today. I mean, that's the reality. But that's not the bargain that's in our minds. That bargain has been forced upon us, and now we're unwitting participants in it. The responsibility for the supply chain resides with the companies creating demand for the resource. That's where the solutions have to start, at the top of the chain. There's a lot of bad actors every level down, but if it weren't for the enormous demand placed by tech and EV companies for Cobalt, the entire chain wouldn't exist. Now, you and I can't get on the ground and solve the problems, but we can spread awareness. And this is how social change happens. First, a horror is revealed by truth seekers. Then people spread that truth all around the world. And inevitably, every time throughout history, when the world learns of a horror, there's a community of conscience that bands together and says this injustice cannot stand, and they drag the rest of humanity forward with their force of will, their moral authority, until that injustice is set right. And that's what will happen if we do our part, which is to continue agitating, spreading awareness, flooding the world with this truth that the Congolese people are screaming out if we just but listen to what they have to say.
Well, I appreciate that you have done this. This is something I had no awareness about. And I do recommend your book. Like I said, it's maybe not a beach read that's going to be fun, but it's really well organized. And I think it's got an amazing commitment to telling this story that otherwise was not told. So thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you.
Well, once again, the book is Cobalt Red. It just came out this year. And if you'd like to follow Siddharth Kara on Twitter, it's Siddharth Kara with 2 Ds, spelled like we do on the screen. And you can also follow him on Instagram, because a lot of these images you just have to see for yourself. It's a gut punch, but it's important for us to be responsible consumers. And I appreciate you sticking with this interview and with the show today. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, we're here every day, 4 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and hover over that bell to make sure you get notices for every show. We'd really appreciate it. And also subscribe to the newsletter. It's at redacted.inc. Thank you again. We'll see you here tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody.